Hey, good morning, y'all. Josh is Severe Weather. Happy Tuesday to you. It's nice to see the sun out here at 6:30 in the morning, but I know next week that's going to change as we flip the clock forward an hour. It's going to be dark again for about an hour. But hey, there are signs of warmer days ahead of us, but we've got to go backwards first before we get to the warm. So kind of February was so mild here in the south and east that it's going to be like we were spoiled, and now we head into the middle of March, and much colder air is on the way back in courtesy of a polar vortex sending cold air down to the south and east that broke off from some stratospheric warming we saw back in January and early February. It took about a month to get the cold to come down, but better late than never, BLTN, right? So let's go ahead and talk about the threats of multiple storms here on both coasts of the states, starting out in the west and then eventually heading to the east over the weekend into next week. On the table is some significant snow for many places in the north and in the west and in the northeast. And in the east, of course, the wet get wetter and the dry get drier, but we may finally have the potential to see something more significant here by next week, this time in the Northeast. And that does include more of the Philly, New York City areas, possibly Baltimore as well. We'll start out in the West where we've got a couple more rounds of heavy snow and heavy coastal rain coming. And we really don't need any more of that in California and Oregon. But unfortunately, the atmospheric river again comes back into play here starting today, but really ramping up as we get to Thursday and Friday and continuing into the weekend. And we're going to see multiple amounts of feet of snow once again across these mountains of California, Oregon, and Washington and British Columbia, and heavy snow amounts as well across the interior of the West, including the Rocky Mountains. And once again, the northern plains and maybe central plains are going to see potentially some major snowfall. That carries eastward into the Great Lakes and eventually the Northeast. We do have one storm which may come close enough to tease us with coastal snow here by Sunday, but maybe a bigger storm towards the middle of next week. And it's a week out still, so things will probably change, but certainly something that we will have to be watching as the pattern becomes more favorable for an East Coast storm. And whether or not it snows everywhere, it's going to be colder and windier. So be prepared for some higher than normal heating bills here in the month of March in the eastern United States. Right now, we do have two storms to watch. The first one will be producing some snowfall here across the northern plains. We have winter weather advisories from eastern Montana into northwestern Minnesota and down to South Dakota and across eastern Colorado. And inside of that, a winter storm warning now for northern South Dakota. And we have winter storm watches into the Twin Cities in northwest Iowa. We have a storm leaving eastern Pennsylvania. I'll talk about that in just a minute, but advisory set to expire here this morning. And then our next storm bringing winter storm conditions to northern Cal and southwestern Oregon. And this area is going to be expanding as we head into the next couple of days. And I wouldn't be shocked if we saw another blizzard warning somewhere here in NorCal and southwest Oregon here by Thursday. So here's a look at the storm reports from the Northeast, because I know some of us really haven't seen a whole lot of snow, and so we'll take what we can get. But definitely an intense little band of snow that moved through last night, and still snowing in the New York City area. In fact, I'll show you the radar here. We can see some light snow moving through the five boroughs and onto Long Island, but this isn't going to be leaving much on the ground, probably just a dusting for most of us. And you can see it backs up to the Poconos, but this is 6:30 Eastern. As the sun is coming up here around 7 o'clock, whatever's falling is probably going to be melting as it hits the ground. And by 8 o'clock, I think this is completely off the coast and we're not looking at anything significant. There's a little bit of light snow too in New England, but you can see the last few returns here pretty much are killing off any kind of snow that would accumulate any, and no reports of actual snow reaching the ground in Connecticut. So a bit disappointing again here in the Northeast. Not really a shock to anybody, but we did see some reports of as much as an inch of snow in Asbury Park. When you get into the Allentown area, about 1 to 2 inches. And then our higher amounts, as we expected, were in north central PA in the Allegheny Mountains, as much as 8.5 inches in Lycoming County, 8 inches in Coudersport, and just shy of 8 inches in Sullivan County as well. So this little band in here did output pretty well over the higher terrain of north central PA into northeast PA. It kind of missed Scranton Wilkes-Barre, and it missed Philadelphia, and pretty much missing New York City as well. So really just this small kind of a 50-mile wide zone here that got any significant snow. Now, looking forward, as we see this disturbance moving offshore, we could see a few more flurries this morning over western and central PA, but it will be falling apart This is 8 o'clock Eastern, so we're already kind of seeing that killed off. We will have kind of a disturbance backing into Maine from New Brunswick that could produce some light amounts of snow over central and down east Maine, and maybe even some sprinkles on Cape Cod, but really not a big deal at this point. What we're more focused on is what's coming out of the west. We see kind of one storm spinning off the Oregon and California coast this afternoon, and we'll see snow showers. Some of those could be on the heavy side in northern Cal, rain showers near the coast. But our next storm system beginning to take shape here across the central Rockies and into the northern plains, and we'll see rain bands developing this afternoon and especially tonight, and training across much of central Oklahoma and northwest Arkansas. There could be a little bit of severe weather on the southern tier of this. Storm Prediction Center has a marginal risk around Wichita Falls, Childress, Altus, Oklahoma, but primarily we're dealing with heavy rain and some lightning strikes embedded in that. Not really a big widespread event. As we get to tomorrow morning, we start to see snow blossoming over Nebraska, Iowa, and southern Minnesota as our storm begins to head eastward. And by the afternoon, heavier amounts of snow over northwest Iowa and especially the Twin Cities. It could get pretty nasty here tomorrow night in the Twin Cities and right up the Mississippi River into north central parts of Minnesota. So most of our storm gets ramped up tomorrow and especially late tomorrow into tomorrow evening. At the same time, we continue to have rain falling in Oklahoma and Arkansas, so it's very possible, aside from a brief break, that we have rain falling for another 24 hours here, and several inches could be coming out of that. And that's just from this storm. We've got another storm on its heels, and I'm going to show you the upper air chart so you can see that. Right now, you see a ridge across the Ohio Valley. Here's our storm off of the west coast, but major impulses coming out, and ahead of it, you can see a pretty good southwest flow aloft here. And because we've got a blocking high over Greenland, this storm will not be able to cut up through the Great Lakes like we've seen so many storms do. And because of that, we really limit the amount of severe weather we get as this system moves out of Kansas and Oklahoma. And primarily when you have this kind of a wind flow out of the southwest and it continues that way and then goes more to west-northwest, you have to be concerned about heavy amounts of rain. Now, this trough is going to keep battering the west coast, but what's going to happen is that piece of energy moving into the upper Midwest is going to be forced to go back down to the east-southeast into the Great Lakes and then the Northeast. With this ridge staying strong here over eastern Canada, we have the ability for low pressure to form near the coast over the weekend. There's disagreement on how close to the coast that ends up happening. I would say if you're in New England, New Jersey, and Long Island, you certainly have to watch out for maybe a surprise event here later on in the weekend. But that's not really going to be it. What we're going to see is this trough over the west is going to stay there and actually retrograde back to the west and allow ridging to move into California and western Canada. And that's going to amplify our jet stream and allow more available cold air to come all the way down into the southeast. You can kind of see the blues here. These are below average heights at 500 millibars. They allow the cold to cross down from Canada into the southeast. We also have a ridge building here in eastern Canada where the two meet. We have the potential to see low pressure forming somewhere in this region. You can see the European shows it later Tuesday, right over the northeast, and then a cutoff low here, not cutoff, but a strong upper low becoming more neutral tilt and then negative tilt right in here. You can see that negative tilt going northwest on Wednesday of next week. And around the 15th, the Ides of March, we do have on the European a signal for a major East Coast storm. Now, the GFS doesn't show it quite the same way. You can see the GFS is a little more progressive here, but it does have a negatively tilted trough. And both of those, to me, indicate that we have to keep our eye on the East Coast here for next Tuesday and Wednesday for potential cyclogenesis, which allows a stronger storm to go. And because you've got this block here, you've got a negative NAO. This could be around for a while and could be a significant snow for somebody for the second half of next week. Here's the European. It's going to kind of hint at that for you guys. You can see storm one here kind of fades. This is Wednesday night, and then Thursday, next storm gets going. We have accumulating snow across the upper Midwest, heavy rain and a few thunderstorms from Texas to Georgia and up to the Ohio River, and a massive storm battering the West Coast here. Low pressure, which will be pretty strong off the West Coast, is going to kind of sit here very slowly and head towards Oregon, and it's going to allow from the southwest heavy rain to move all the way into southern Cal and heavy snow into the mountains, and then that will reform when it gets to the plains here on Saturday. At the same time, you've got low pressure moving from the Great Lakes to the northeast, and that could produce some snow in PA, New York, and New Jersey on Friday night. The European suppresses it and keeps it farther south and east and says, sorry, we're not going to get a big snowfall out of it. However, This big storm in the west, when it jumps across the plains here over the weekend into the southeast, it cuts up the coast. Here's Monday and here's Tuesday, and we've got a significantly deepening storm. This is a classic significant East Coast storm, nor'easter track, and producing very heavy snow inland across the Northeast. And that is just one solution, but it is something I'll be watching for you guys. I wouldn't even give this more than a second thought if I didn't see it continue to show up on the models run after run here. But we're talking about 8 to 10 days in the future, so a lot can change. So I can throw a map up here right now that shows you the snow totals. I guarantee it's not going to work out that way. So there's no sense in hyping it up too much at this point, but just know with the trough set up the way it is here, with this cold supply coming down, with still an active jet coming up the East Coast, it's definitely on the table here. So that's what we're going to be watching for you. And this track continues to stay active, by the way. We've got another storm later next week expected to move through the central US. So we're going to see a ton of snow in the west, a ton of snow up in here, and potentially significant snowfall across parts of the Northeast and maybe even the mid-Atlantic as well. The GFS model has our big storm moving into the Great Lakes. It has a more significant storm popping up at the last minute here, Friday night, Saturday morning, affecting southeast New England and then moving out. And then the following storm takes a more southern approach, and the GFS kind of kicks it out to sea here. It's got the upper low up in here. This is actually the polar vortex. The European, if you remember, had it down here. So it is something we'll still be watching, but again, there's not a great amount of certainty. But what you do need to know is because we've got the block up here over Greenland, the cold air continues to come in. The beatings continue until morale improves here. So somebody in the Northeast is going to see a lot of snow over the next 2 weeks. It's just really tough to say who and what. By the way, this GFS run goes a little bit crazy and pinches off a low over the south central US and tries to bring winter weather into Texas and Oklahoma. That I'm not so sure about. But it is something we'll have to keep an eye on. I think a more likely chance that we're seeing it in the Great Lakes and Northeast at this point. Here's our total snow on the European out west, and you can see, man, it's going to be really nasty here with up to 200 inches of snow in California. What is that in feet? I don't even know. It's just so much. But even like 40 to 80 inches in many places across the Cascades and the Siskiyou range over here. And you get to the Rockies, we see over 5 feet again in parts of Utah, Wyoming, and Idaho. And we start to see snow across the Denver area, potentially maybe a few inches as well as we head into next week. Heading into the east, obviously, we've got our storm leaving here. Here's the next storm into the Great Lakes and upper Midwest. And you see the one after it over the weekend. And this is just the European. It tries to spit stuff out here all the way into the southern Appalachians. Not so sure that's going to happen. But you can see in the Northeast, this operational run drops quite a bit of snow over eastern PA, New York, and into interior New England. But even, and I'll zoom in, I'll show it to you guys, even though I don't know if it's going to play out that way. But even in eastern PA, I mean, 4 feet of snow would be some winter storm lovers' dreams here. But even like New York City shows about a foot of snow, a foot in Connecticut, 6 inches in Boston, 3 feet in the Berkshires, even over a foot and a half in Philadelphia. We can dream at this point, but we'll see if this is how it plays out. Just something that I'm going to be monitoring pretty closely, as you guys can imagine. Rainfall amounts look to be pretty heavy here over North Texas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, potential for 4 or 5 inches. Out west, it's going to be even worse. Maybe a foot or more of rain expected here in the next 7 days. You can see that as we zoom in. Southwestern Oregon and especially the California coast all the way down to about Santa Monica. No, I'm sorry. Santa Barbara could see a couple inches of snow, rain, and then significant amounts here over the Central Valley, 3 to 6 inches. The North Bay gets 6 inches, 7 to 8 in southwestern Oregon, and even Seattle's probably going to see a couple inches of rain. Portland will see an inch or two of rain as well, but the higher amounts will be banked up across the mountains. The central United States has to be more to be concerned about with flood potential, especially in Oklahoma, 3 to 4 inches of rain potential here, central Arkansas, northern Mississippi, and Alabama. You get farther north and east, and the chances for significant rain start to divert to your south. So we see this potential mainly going to be south of the Tennessee Valley. And as I take you guys into Florida here, I'm going to show you Florida. You'll notice that we start to see a little bit more significant rainfall totals moving into central and southern Florida, but it still isn't much here. We're not going to be able to wipe out the recent drought that we're in. Temperatures here on the European, you can see it is still pretty warm here, but the warmth does get to be suppressed as colder air moves in from the northeast, kind of a backdoor front here tomorrow. That's going to cool us off in the Carolinas and Tennessee Valley. And as time wears on over the weekend, it does stay warm over the Gulf Coast states and the southern plains, but another push of cold comes down, and that will wipe out the warmth here by the 13th and the 14th. And you can see it's a lot colder here over the eastern United States, pretty much widespread cold. The Great Lakes remain above average, so if you are in the Northeast, be aware that the snow belts could get going with lake effect snow here in the middle of March as temperatures on the lakes remain to be above average. And that's maybe not as much an issue for Buffalo, but more the traditional snow belts with the northwesterly flow. Something I'll be watching for you guys here. Storm Prediction Center has a marginal risk of severe weather tonight in the Red River Valley, a marginal risk in the same spot tomorrow, and just a general risk of thunderstorms on Thursday into Friday. So there's not a zero chance of severe weather, but it's pretty slim at this point. I think the bigger concern is just going to be heavy rain and training thunderstorms. And finally, let's look at temperatures off the GFS. One more warm day here across the Carolinas before it turns colder tonight and tomorrow and stays cool right on through the end of the week. But really, as we get to next week, it gets a lot colder pretty much everywhere else. Even down into Florida, we start to cool down some. It'll still be warm in South Florida, but Central Florida on northward, we'll see a nice break from the warmth. And you can see by the middle of next week, the 15th, as the NCAA tournament gets rolling, we're talking much chillier weather all the way down into the southern U.S. with 30s and 40s expected by Wednesday, teens and 20s in the Great Lakes and Northeast. And very cold across the Dakotas today. It warms up as our storm moves on to the plains here from the Rockies. But when I say warm up, it's still going to be well below 15 degrees in many places. Texas stays pretty hot this week, 80s and 90s in South Texas. We do have some cooler weather trying to make its way down, but our boundary is stuck kind of over the Red River. But as we get into next week, you'll notice it does cool down a bit more as we get to Tuesday and Wednesday of next week. We're talking below average temps, but actually they're going to be pretty comfy. 50s and 60s shouldn't be bad at all here. And finally, out west, it is quite chilly across much of the west. That is nothing new here. As we get into the weekend, it starts warming up in Arizona and California. We start warming up on Saturday. As we get into early next week, as ridging starts to build in, we finally start to see some 70s and 80s back in Southern Cal inland and 50s and 60s near the coast. Even the Northwest starts warming up here. Many of these spots have been in the single digits and teens. Now we're talking 20s and 30s by the middle of next week. So we flip it over so that the West, which has been so cold, turns milder while the East turns much colder. Finally, I do want to mention something that has just been it's like the Duracell bunny over here, the Energizer bunny out here in the West or in Africa. This is a Madagascar, and we've got a rapidly intensifying cyclone Freddy, which has been around for over a month across the Indian Ocean basin here. It looks like a Category 1 hurricane, and the forecast is for it to circle around here over the Mozambique Channel and then move northwest and hit Mozambique once again as maybe a Category 2 or 3 hurricane. And you can see this is the track of the storm. February 6th, actually, no. Yeah, February 4th, it began as a disturbance south of Indonesia, looped around, tracked northwest of Australia, intensified into a strong tropical cyclone over the middle of the ocean, became a Category 5 with 160 mile an hour winds, then weakened a little bit, but still was intense as it came into Madagascar here on the 21st. It crossed and then weakened into a tropical storm, redeveloped some, and then hit Mozambique as a severe tropical storm. And this was a week and a half ago. Then it spun over Mozambique, Africa, and now is back over the water here and strengthening with some rapid intensification and just a very bad setup here for Western Madagascar. And eventually we're going to see that landfall somewhere here on the Mozambique coast. And it looks like that's going to be Friday night or into Saturday. Just ridiculous. But this is going to be a record-breaking cyclone. And we're talking February and March, which it is summer over the Southern Hemisphere. Thank you all for your time today. I hope you have a great Tuesday. More videos to come talking about the heavy snow threat, the colder weather, the heavy rain threat, and maybe severe weather, and just a lot more to unpack here for March. March typically is the month that creates the most extreme weather across the United States, and we're starting to see that here over the next 2 weeks. Will we see a big snow in the Northeast? Stay tuned. I'll tell you more as I get more certainty from the models. If you could subscribe to my channel, you won't miss the latest. And I really appreciate y'all's time. I want to give all the thanks to my Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ, a God who gives me the strength every day to do what I do, who has called me to be a meteorologist and gives me strength. And Nehemiah 8:10 says, "Do not grieve, for the joy of the Lord is your strength." And I mean, the way I unpack this is it's okay to grieve the loss of a loved one. It's okay to grieve, but know that the Lord is there to give you the strength to overcome that grief and that loss, knowing that Jesus died on the cross for us so that we could have eternal life if we choose to accept that gift. So when Nehemiah says do not grieve, he's not necessarily talking about the loss of a loved one, but not to grieve the situation you're in, or to just say that your life is worthless, to grieve your own existence. Just realize that there is joy coming from the Lord to give you the strength to overcome any challenges you may have. It's going to happen on the Lord's time, not on yours. And all you can really do is pray and continue to encourage, to be encouraged by others, to encourage others, and to serve the Holy Kingdom through Jesus Christ, our Savior. I'm happy to pray for you, any spoken or unspoken prayer requests. And if you could pray for me, I really would appreciate that. Just give me the encouragement to continue to produce top content for you guys, to continue to get you prepared for weather, which could, impact the safety of millions, to be honest with you. But just to do what I can on YouTube every day, and that's to grow my channel, but most importantly, to serve God. It's not about me, it's about God. And I just want you all to know that is why I am so joyful that the Lord gives me the strength to do what I can do pretty much 6 days a week. Thank you all so much for your time. God bless you. I hope you have a wonderful day. I'll talk to you again tomorrow. Take care.